Take it away, Adam.
Good. Thank you very much indeed, Lynn. And welcome back to this final session of the conference. My name's Adam Smith. I'm the Osborne Professor of United States Political History and the Director of the Rothermere American Institute. And we're very pleased to be co-sponsoring this conference this year. So welcome, everybody, and welcome to our three distinguished panelists. I have some questions for the panel, but really I think the point of this round, as it's been explained to me, at least the way I'd like to interpret it, is that this is the chance for you all in the room to put to these three distinguished panelists any questions that you have that are still remaining, that perhaps things that have loose ends from previous sessions, or questions that you feel haven't been fully addressed. So get thinking of your questions. We will, as Lynn says, move quickly. So I'll ask the panelists to keep their answers brief, and I'd ask you as well to keep your questions brief. I'll just kick off by asking the three of you in turn just to tell us if there's the one takeaway you have from what you can see so far of the exit polls. If you were to point to one thing which you think is notable or interesting or surprising, that will be noticed in 4, 8, 12 years time about the 2024 election, what would you say, Rob?
I hate to answer this question the way I'm going to do it, but nothing yet. But there's some interesting structural realignments that might be brand related, meaning when Trump's not on the ticket, does it change? But maybe we are seeing a realignment of middle class voters. And if so, what does that mean? I mean, Ohio used to be a bellwether state, and now it's reliably Republican. And Ohio looks a lot like Michigan, Wisconsin, the Midwest, and Pennsylvania. And I'm just wondering, the other thing I'm really curious about is college-educated voters. Is it the opposite effect, that they have a dislike of Trump and they would move back if he was off the ballot? I don't know.
Thank you. JoDee.
I'm going to go a little more micro in the area that I work in and look at more consistently with LGBTQ voters. And a couple things I would observe. One is that this group of voters has stayed quite consistent in voting for pro-equality candidates over time, and into the 80%, which is very significant. But the population is not as great as some other groups. However, over these coming 15 years, by 2030, LGBTQ voters will account for 1 in 7 voters. By 2040, LGBTQ voters will account for 1 in 5 per the population projections. That is really significant. That is larger than the evangelical numbers in our country. That is larger than the labor members numbers in our country. And so for my seat, that is one of the reasons I have hope coming out of this election and can see a future where equality, LGBTQ rights, and other things become what we have as opposed to what we're being challenged for right now. And so, I can see that, into the future, but, it's obviously a very difficult time for the community right now. Don't want to sugarcoat anything.
I'd say how much Trump crushed it. I mean, he just crushed it across the board. He won in every category. He moved every county. We often hear people talk about Trump's ceiling, blew past that ceiling, won with non-white voters, working class voters, won in states people said were going to be close. He wasn't going to win. He won them all. Made New Jersey close, made Virginia close. I think it was just the sheer dominance that his team showed when we spent weeks saying how close this was. It could go either way. The Trump ground game may not be good. They outsourced it, and then it just all that BS evaporated that night.
Thank you. And you actually anticipated my next run of questions to all three of you, which was specifically about the ground game, because I was just going to picking up on that. Ended with Jarrod. There was a lot of talk, wasn't there, in the run up to last Tuesday about the alleged superiority of the Democratic ground game. Was that wrong? Was in fact the Democratic ground game not superior to the Republican ground game, or is this just irrelevant? Is this not in the end, or is it just that however good your sales force, if people don't want to buy the product, it doesn't matter?
Oh, you want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, classic Republican fashion, it took us 4 to 6 years to evolve to the new voting way, and we lost a lot of elections because of it. But I think this year, from the moment the 2022 wave was not what we expected it to be, you saw the Republicans really focus on two things: candidate quality and get out the vote, early voting. You saw Trump change his message. You saw the party invest hundreds of millions behind it, and they showed up. And I can't speak to the Democratic efforts with great detail other than what we saw early voting, especially urban areas, particularly in Pennsylvania, they just didn't materialize at the numbers that were needed to even make, election day a chance, I think, for Harris to win.
I lost track of the question.
Does the ground game?
Ground game, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry,
How
everyone.
did-
I was starting to think about other things. In terms of ground game, I think there were very solid pockets of it. I think that Tammy Baldwin, the senator who won in Wisconsin, had a very good ground game. It should have been a ground game that helped the whole ticket. And it did not do everything. So the final part of your question to us was that part of the top of the ticket package? It was. And so she was able to win and get better numbers. Same with Ruben Gallego. And as it was pointed out, I think yesterday, that should have been a bigger margin in that race, and it wasn't, but still running stronger than Harris was in those states. I think one of the things you always have to think about as you do campaigns and do ground game is that, seeing the enthusiasm come out this year. And I said yesterday, we are literally living history right now. And nothing like this has ever happened quite like this, with changing the top of the ticket with this short of a window up to an election. And so as we're thinking about that happening, that enthusiasm and the reasons for it, we haven't really talked about, but some of it was relief, if we're being honest, on the Democratic side, that Biden was not going to continue, that he was giving it up and somebody was going to carry it forward. Then it's Harris, right? And so folks aligned very quickly, and that enthusiasm really popped. There were lots of volunteers who engaged, but you have to translate that into votes. And so I don't think it's a question of necessarily, was there enough effort on the ground game? I mean, we had people ask, okay, you don't have to knock on my door another time, like I'm voting or whatever it is, right? Yeah, please. And so there was serious ground game, but there was a gap in terms of, I think, enough time and better messaging for them to decide that they could go with Kamala Harris in this particular election. So we talked about how hard her path was yesterday. And I think that's true, but I also think, those decision-making processes, everything that people go through, that Trump made it easier. He just flat out made it easier in the election in terms of just laying out what he was going to do.
I'd say the big difference in ground game is people vote differently now. The ground game isn't turning people out for election day. And the big switch that the Trump team made is people are voting weeks leading up to election day. Election day is now the last day to vote it's the end instead of the day that you're trying to turn out voters. So when it talks about ground game, I mean, I went to a bunch of events, Trump events throughout Pennsylvania in that final weekend, and the crowd would get asked who has already voted, and 2/3 of the crowd would raise their hand. Another third was very much like, we want to show up on election day and do it. But that was a big shift from previous years with Trump was that Trump crowd, the MAGA crowd, fully embraced getting to the polls early, and I think that's a big thing that is a change in ground game, which will now we'll have that going forward.
Yeah. Can I add one thing to what Jarrod's saying? I agree. And when you track the early vote, like we get information, I got data every day about the voters we were targeting and whether or not they had voted. Okay. So if you vote early by paper ballot, or if you go into the auditors, or if it's a satellite voting location in the United States, they put that information into their county auditor, their state systems get that, and we get information back very quickly. On the Democratic side, we use what's called the VAN, the Voter Activation Network, and it's the data that we all tap into. And so we get to see quickly, like who from our side has voted, who might not be from our side, who has voted. And so one of the things you could observe, it was how many people who are, many of whom were consistent voters, but they were voting earlier. That doesn't scare the bejesus out of you, because you're like, well, that's a person who's going to vote, right? But what it means in a campaign is that then you can move your resources. You already know you have those people taken care of. And in all truth, Democrats have been better at this part than Republicans have been for a long time in many places, not every place. But they moved up their vote. That was even less time for people to decide or consider Kamala Harris, right? Because in most places, like the early vote started 2 weeks to 40 days out, I think. A couple states are, right? Okay, so imagine we were saying we had 100 days basically, and then take away 40 days, and they're banking votes. It was also really hard to analyze because of 2020 being a presidential election during COVID, where most people voted by mail or at a distance, right? And so it really did complicate things. So when you're like, okay, well, they're just banking votes they were already going to get. So now where are we going, right? And so it was hard to really do solid analysis from my seat on some of that information in terms of where were we really in some of those votes.
Thank you. I want to open it up to questions from the floor. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Steve, and I'm not a student. We actually started a little bit into this in a panel I was on earlier, but didn't go very deeply. And I just wanted to get, particularly from Rob and from Jarrod, a hot take on this. And Bettina, if you want to jump up, that'd be great too. But notionally, it's this. We've been talking a lot for the last couple of days about the middle class, the working class voter that abandoned Democrats and chose Trump and the Republicans in this cycle. And also Michael Steele raised the notion that those are the same voters who are most now dependent upon entitlement and other kinds of social welfare programs that Republicans traditionally and historically want to cut. So my question is, how do you think Trump and the Republicans, and in particular the budget hawks, are going to sort of adapt to the fact that it's now their constituents who are the welfare recipients and the beneficiaries of these social programs like Obamacare, when so much of the base in another iteration wanted to oppose and get rid of all those things?
Well, I wouldn't say get rid of it. I mean, you're going to laugh, but it's what they're talking about is reforming the programs and cutting out the fraud and the abuse and stuff, modernizing it, using technology to deliver services better, faster, smarter. And, I think you're seeing a big effort launch today. And I mean, God knows where it ends up, but that we're going to have a Department of Government Efficiency that's going to maybe what happened at Twitter, where 80% of the workforce was laid off and the product still delivered and grew, will happen to the federal government. So, I think there's always been, if you look at the last 50 years, the southern states have always been dependent on the social safety network, yet they have been reliably, for smaller government, they kind of switch back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, but, they haven't, they're just different than, say, the Northeast when it comes to how they talk about benefits. So that's always kind of fit in the Republican Party. And candidly, Washington has not ever been serious about cutting spending. though I think with our current debt load and as it approaches, I think 35 trillion, I think we're going to have to either make some tough choices or some tough choices will be pushed upon us. And listen, I think what Biden doesn't get enough credit for and the Federal Reserve was they made a hard choice to raise interest rates. But, excuse me, I think it was the right move, and it was probably very politically painful for everybody. Not that they really could have done anything, but my only point is you knew it was the right move because the Republicans haven't really said. I always thought they'd make that a campaign issue. And you've heard Trump around the edges talk about lowering interest rates, but I think there was a general acceptance like that was part of the medicine we had to take for having interest rates so low. But so anyway, I know it's not a great answer to your question, but the answer is, social welfare, the social safety network has always fit into the Republican coalition, just we talk about it a little differently and our goals are a little different. But I don't think our voters are super anxious that these programs are going away.
So you maintain entitlement programs, but you also cut taxes. So therefore, the budget deficit can't be allowed to matter, basically.
Well, do you
Well,
want to take
I
the
would
tax?
just
You want to
say,
take the tax piece? I mean, the tax.
Trump has a certain bond with his voters. And I have been in the Oval and I've heard him say it, and he will continue to say it. How will this affect my voters? He does not want to hurt working class America. He is a populist. He will not. I guess he's not going to go down any road just because that's a traditional feeling of the Republican Party. He is redefining it, and he's redefining the principles of it. And I do think he is going to govern that way this year. I'm not going to get out in front of him and say what his policy is going to be when he gets in there. However, I do think there are going to be moments where these tough decisions happen where he is going to look around and say, how is this going to affect the working class? And he will not hesitate to say, I don't care how it's been done in the past. I'm not going to do that to the working class voter. And I think that's a difference of Trump, that he has that bond with the voters. He's on Twitter, or X, he's seeing what people are saying. And that is something he takes very seriously, regardless of what are think tanks and policy positions people have had in the past.
So deficits, fine.
Well, I would offer from my time on the Hill and doing campaigns is it's an on and off switch. If the Democrats are in charge, the deficit switch goes back on and Republicans freak out about it and make it an issue at some level, whether it's on the Hill or out in campaigns, it pops up. When they're in charge and they want to do tax cuts and other things, they shut the switch off for a while and they get by with it. I mean, it's been repeated like for cycle after cycle if you look at who's in charge.
Right. Next question. Yes. Yes.
Hi, I've got two questions. One, this is sort of for Jarrod. What happens to never Trump Republicans now? Is there a home for them in the Republican Party? I mean, you saw Trump aides come out in like Harris campaign ads. I think he even had Mike Pence the other day saying that he's against pardoning January 6 rioters, which isn't necessarily an anti-Trump stance, but it is against something that Trump has said that he wants to do. Where do those Republicans sort of fit into the party?
If they backtrack on the never part of the never Trump, then there's a room for them in the party. I think too much attention is spent on never Trump. I think there's a lot of grifting going on with never Trump. It was completely irrelevant in this election. They get a lot of TV time. I see a lot of people that I worked with in the first term who get themselves on TV because they can bash Trump and Republicans. Doesn't affect voters. I don't think it had any positive impact for Harris. In some ways, I do think it even helps Trump because he sees that these people are making money and making themselves famous by getting on TV. that is, so I don't, I mean, if they're gonna, you know, cross off the never part of the never Trump, and there's room for them in the party.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're either Republicans or Republicans or Republicans. So either you believe in limited government, you believe in self-determination, some of our core principles, and that makes sense to you. And you may not like the leader of the party at the time, or at the moment, but, I would expect people are principle-based, and, if this is an uncomfortable time for them, then maybe they come back around and we lose them for now, or they just don't vote or whatever. But, I guess I would say he built a much bigger coalition, so the Never Trumpers, I'm kind of with Jarrod, are kind of irrelevant. I mean, he got more votes than he did in any time, any Republican in the history of the country. So you're doing something right. What was your second question?
It out. Like, what's the deal? Who is JD Vance going forward? Who is he in the administration? And I think there was a lot of talk in sort of Democratic circles that got really excited, being like he was the wrong VP pick for Trump. And obviously that didn't seem to have a huge impact. Like, again, we've said it before, Trump won. But sort of what is his role, and was he the right guy?
I think so. I think, I mean, having been through, working for the VP Pence with Trump, I think he was looking for something very different this time. Pence at that time there was an electorate that he brought to it. He brought, Christian conservatives that helped in the campaign. In the White House, he had worked on the Hill. He was a governor, so he maintained a lot of those relationships, and so he was a very big part of the legislative side. He was counseling, Trump had not worked in DC before, so Pence had spent years and years there. And so he was a bit of a counsel on all things DC. Trump certainly does not need that anymore. He's been president for 4 years. He had built this movement, so he did not need anyone to, bring a part of the coalition in the election towards him. He had that already. I think, he saw JD as a very effective spokesman, a spokesman for not just Trump, but just the MAGA movement overall, that the MAGA movement can endure. And, I think all of that play in the early days of kind of the press stories about JD, I mean, I think all of that flipped the more JD got out there. So obviously that he did very well in the debate against Tim Walz, and that was kind of the turning point. But JD's excellent on those Sunday shows, and Trump watches the Sunday shows, and he watches the cable news programming. And JD has a style that is underappreciated, I think, of being able to be combative when he needs to, but get across the message in a practical way that related to people. And then even the kind of added gift of turning it on the media when they step over the line. And I think that's what you're going to see JD's role being in the White House. I think he's going to be a very effective communicator for Trump and for the MAGA movement. And obviously he's a senator too, so there'll be a lot of interaction on that Hill. But I think that's what Trump was looking for. He's in a much different position because he's been president for 4 years. So he's looking for a different kind of vice president.
Yeah, I would just say, Trump is really different. I think Steve said it, like he's an asymmetric kind of candidate. It's very strange and strange has a negative connotation. What I mean is how he comes at problems is completely different than how pretty much every Republican I've ever been around has been trained, which is like, comes out of the Rove Bush school of like, oh yeah, this guy, and he turns the dials in Wisconsin, and and it's like all this like micro calculations. In JD, you have a self-proclaimed hillbilly who's a Marine, was enlisted, went to Yale, wrote one, best-selling book, and was successful in business, and he's only 40. I mean, he has a Netflix movie about his life. I mean, he's a remarkable person who is a deep thinker, is unafraid to defend what he believes in. Rarely makes a mistake. And I think a lot of folks were unsure of that pick, and the left kind of hopped all over him. They have a great effect when you pick a vice presidential candidate with a very low profile of defining them before the Republicans can. See Sarah Palin. And, you know, he really had to work hard, and he worked hard to define himself. But, you know, if you look at the summer, and it just shows you strategic thought, you know, there was a lot of people who were kind of in the mix to be Trump's VP, and all of us little professionals were like, oh, this guy turns the dial here, and it does that, and this gal does this, and, you know, Nikki brings in the never Trumper, you know, like everyone's having these like kind of insane conversations. And JD just rolled up his sleeves and he, you know, defended Trump. He raised a bunch of money for Trump. He articulated what, you know, Make America Great looks like in a second administration. And he kind of ripped the nomination, that VP slot out of everyone else's hands to the point that it was not even really a debate who it was going to be by the end. And, you know, yeah, he helped in the Midwest, and he does have some great blue collar roots, but I think he is an extension of kind of how Trump views the political landscape. And, you know, he got picked with a beard, which if you know Trump, no beards, and he still got picked. So it was remarkable. It's just childhood rebellion.
Yes. Any next questions? Questions about facial hair are encouraged, but you can ask about other things.
Hi, Michael Lundgren, MSc in Education and Child Development, and a Marshall Scholar. JoDee, you talked about feeling hopeful because of the growing size of the LGBTQ voting bloc. I think Democrats once spoke in similar terms about Latinos, under the assumption that a growing Latino demographic would be reliable Democratic voters. I think we saw in this election that that assumption may not have been entirely correct. So how in the coming decades do Democrats work to retain LGBTQ voters as a reliable voting base and not just rely on positions on equality as a guarantor of their support?
Really good question. I think you can never take any part of your base or your voting bloc for granted. And I think that Democrats took some of the, you know, Latino voting bloc for granted. And I think there's always a risk there. Our numbers are currently higher and have stayed consistent about voting for pro-equality candidates. And I think the other piece that our community knows is we have Donald Trump's number. He might say once in a while a couple of nice things, but the policies and the push is negative to the community fairly consistently. And so we've seen that, you know, even at his first convention, he held up the pride flag upside down, right? And so makes the attempt, but not quite right there. Now, I would say, and the community is feeling very under attack right now. And I think some folks might think it's only the trans community feels under attack. They feel extremely under attack, and they're petrified right now, to be honest. And so, you know, we're kind of dividing our time between talking to community and talking about the resources that people need, and then what the future might look like. But it's in pieces right now of those areas. And so what's it going to take to hold on to this? Well, I think one thing that I'm very concerned about is how younger voters did not show up in this election. And so that is definitely a piece as we think about the LGBTQ community. If we don't have more of those voters showing up for themselves and supporting, you know, other folks in that generation, or seeing a future with, you know, I don't think about it as only like the Democratic Party. I think about pro-equality leaders. If we don't have them showing up in that space, that's how it will chip away, you know, at our vote very quickly. Generations older than me, and I'm still happy that I can say there are generations older than me, you know, they're not so LGBTQ, or I might say there weren't so many people who were out, right? This generation is like, all bets are off. Like, you all know this better than I do. It's your lived experience. You know, I still come from a generation where I'm kind of the cutoff of folks who, like couples who were together who had children or not, right? And maybe, you know, that's a longer conversation. So it's very generational, but if more of that generation doesn't vote, that's a risk too. And so I think we're in a space right now where we will continue to make progress. the numbers of people who know people in the LGBTQ community, that is not just a thing that happens in the cities and in certain streets in certain cities, right? It's all over the country. You know, I grew up in a really tiny town in rural Iowa. And so, you know, my whole town knows my story, right? It's no secret, right? But there are also trans people, non-binary people, and grandparents who now have, you know, grandkids who are identifying in different ways. It's a really different landscape, but less of the next generation voting is a risk. If Democrats, like there are a couple out there right now kind of critiquing what transpired in the election, I would offer, not with all the information they should have, but that will be my work for next week when I get back. But, you know, there's always risk that the pendulums, I think a lot of times in politics, it's more like a pendulum. And so the pendulum can swing out on a couple of these issues. Maybe it's about working class folks. Maybe folks say we shouldn't do so much this or that. But the pendulum swings out, but the pendulum operates best when it goes a little closer back to the middle. It takes a lot of effort to keep that pendulum out there. And the pull is back towards the middle on some of these issues. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see where we land. But I think it's there's always risk, but I've seen a lot of consistency over these last, you know, I've been at HRC now 10 years. It's grown and we've reached a solid high plateau of vote. And so we'd love to keep it there.
JoDee, can I just ask you to spell out exactly what it is that the LGBTQ community are frightened of beyond, as it were, perceptions and what specific actions are they frightened about?
I'll tell you a story and then I'll get more specific with you on that. So, you know, Stephanie Rule did an interview. My memory is it was about 2 weeks before the election, and a young voter who I believe was non-binary was offered an opportunity, like all the other folks on the panel, to say one question you wanted to ask Kamala Harris and one question you wanted to ask Donald Trump, if you had that opportunity. And this young person, who probably early 20s, this young person said, well, I would like to ask Kamala Harris, if you're elected, how soon can you pass the Equality Act, which is the civil rights bill for LGBTQ people? The question that they said they wanted to ask Donald Trump was, do you think I'm human? Okay, so in terms of how the community's feeling right now, that is it. So if you're wondering, like I have people reaching out to us consistently, should I go ahead and get all my documents in line? Should I leave the country or my state? Should I, these ads and everything that ran, I'm getting more harassment. Like, you know, there are things like that happening in the community, and you know, it's their healthcare, it's their official documents, it's marriages, it's all these things. And some might argue here in this room that, well, that wasn't really all Trump. That's true, but Trump gave a little too much permission in some of this for these other things to happen. What we have learned and seen is when you look at like FBI statistics on hate crimes, 40% of hate crimes are happening to LGBTQ people right now in terms of what's reported. All hate crimes are not reported, but the ones that are being reported, 40% are towards LGBTQ people. That has been on the rise these last few years. And so, there are just tangible things that the community is tremendously worried about as we go into this new administration. And so, potential bills around defining, genders, bills around access to healthcare or not having access to healthcare, that transgender people will not be allowed to serve in the military. There are currently over 16,000 transgender people who serve in the military, that they would be booted from the military and they would not have the pension. And so those are real things that the community is really, really petrified of right now.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, there's a question over there. So the
Yeah.
microphone's closer and then we'll come to you. So yes, go on.
I'm Pat Egan, and you could say I'm a perpetual student. So I wanted to ask a little bit about the gender gap among the youngest generation. So it looks like the latest exit poll update, it has 61% of women under 30 supported Kamala Harris in a tough year. You got to think that number goes up in a better year for Democrats. And if that gap stays steady going forward, that's a real problem for Republicans. Women vote at greater rates than men, and one could argue that the Republicans, and particularly Donald Trump, have had a real problem with young women for misogyny, for alleged sexual assault, sexual harassment charges, et cetera. Is this a problem that's pinned to Donald Trump particularly, or is it a problem for the party generally?
Want me to go? Well, not every other year I come here, and some years we win and some years we lose, but I always get a question about, or there's always a question about the dying Republican Party. First it was Hispanic voters, then it was women and young, and it's, the Republican Party is like the Democratic Party. It's a brand, and it flexes to build the biggest coalition it can, however it can. I've been talking to some Republicans, and we've been kind of thinking through like the modern Democratic Party. If you project out election night, and I think it's a mistake to do that because, as Haley Barbour taught us, it's never as good as you think it is. It's never as bad as you think it is. But if you project out this party that you see from just one election, so you have to be very careful doing this. You start to, like I said earlier, you start to see kind of shades of like the Republican Party in the late '80s. Party dominated by minority, single issue voters that cast, that fund a lot, that have a very strong opinion and drive a lot of the perception of the party. And that happens to be, women in particular under 30 with reproductive rights. And so I think that's kind of what it is. I mean, the Democratic Party for 10 years, I mean, let's not forget, in a debate sponsored by the Denver newspaper, I think it's Denver Post, the moderators called Mark Udall Mark Uterus in the debate because of his focus on abortion. So this is not a new phenomenon, but when you put a few $1 billion behind, this is what our party stands for, and it's reinforced, as a reinforcing mechanism. So I think that is just reflective of the Democratic Party has made a concerted effort to go after that vote. Anyone who's watching NFL anywhere in the near blue or purple state is seeing these ads, and and you saw the issue. I mean, all summer, what was the most important issue in the coming election to liberal voters, not Democratic. It was abortion rights, reproductive rights, and then democracy came in around post Labor Day, and then October we started to see the economy, and so. I mean, I think that's just the reflective of that. Like, good job, they got their base voter out.
Yeah, but once again, if you look at numbers, that yes, it happened now. How can it continue to happen? Or how could Trump make a play for some of those folks who are also working class women? And I think we should maybe divide that up at times too. Look, pay equity. Access to the higher level jobs. And I think, it hurt me a little as somebody who has been a Democrat, that they got the first female chief of staff in the White House.
That was remarkable. I can't believe that.
No,
it really blew me away.
It's great.
How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. And I was like, damn it, I'm jealous. I know, I'm a little jealous. I'm admitting it.
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I just didn't know.
I know.
I was like, huh.
But, I also think, there's a broader group that we have to attract, and there has to be more for them than that issue as we move forward. And I would argue that the Trump administration has an opportunity. I don't see how, with the current makeup of the House and Senate, that gets through. But if they were able to get something through like that, that could be game changing for this next generation. I don't think it's going to happen. And so I think part of this is the Democrats have to keep building out those arguments around this. Like, you should have access to your own health care, reproductive and otherwise, in making those decisions. And once you're in the workforce, you should have every possibility in front of you. And right now, that's not true for that generation, this next generation.
Can I try a theory on you all in relation to this question, which is the hypothesis would be that abortion in particular as an issue has come to the end of its line for as a Democratic Party issue for the following reason, which is that if you are in a state like Missouri and you're able to vote for a ballot measure which protects abortion rights in that state, but you're also then, as clearly some people did, cast your presidential ballot for Donald Trump, then you get, as it were, as you may see it, as a voter, the best of both worlds. You get to reject the Democratic Party, which you don't trust on the national level, but you still get to protect your reproductive rights. And if that is replicated in enough in enough states, then the issue is being taken away from the Democratic Party as one that can effectively mobilize. I mean, it's always going to mobilize their core voters, right? But as a mobilizer, but as a mechanism for building a winning coalition, it's
Well,
a
I
dead
think,
end.
yeah, on the presidential level, sure, I'm sure on the state level, it still will be a very effective argument. But I think your point is well taken on the in a federal election, presidential election. Yes, I think that's off the table. And the other thing I would say is, and kind of relates back to the previous question, is, you know, the people like Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita are looking at these same numbers. They know that, and they knew all along that you know the base Kamala voter would be young females, and therefore they knew, okay, well, we know that the Democrats have a problem with male voters, and so we need to drive out those voters. And the only reason I say that is, you know, both sides have 4 years to look at it and map out, you know, the best course they think forward. I mean, if we sat here 4 years ago, I don't think many people would think that Trump would win the popular vote and get 312 electoral votes. And so what happens over, you know, the next 4 years matter. And you got very smart people, both in the Democrat Party and in the Republican Party. And I think the people around Donald Trump fully aware of those statistics, and obviously similar on abortion. You know, they are going to be looking at that, and they know that's a challenge they have to tackle over the next 4 years.
I think it is absolutely not the end of this issue for Democratic voters. I think we were getting close to it being done before the Dobbs case. And I think that hit in a way that brought it back to life for many additional voters who had not been paying attention to this, primarily some of the younger voters. And so I think it did light it up in a way that will not go away soon. I'm not saying it's not, you know, going to stay as strong as it has been, but these last couple of elections, this has been a part of how Democrats have put together their coalitions in winning this issue. You know, I'm old enough to have worked in campaigns when for Tom Harkin, where we talked about abortion, but we didn't talk about it on TV. We did it in the mail. We did it in phone calls, very targeted. And most of what we talked about was that the exceptions for rape, incest, life of mother. Well, that's being taken off the table, right? With a lot of these bans, right? And so, you know, yes, they're being overturned, but some of them are still in place. And how is this going to work? And so I think the extreme to some of those states some of the states have gone to, you know, is going to be the problem. And I think until more of that has gone away, I don't think it's going to get solved. I also don't think we're anywhere close to probably passing a national ban. We're also not close to, you know, passing, you know, protections federally in the next 8 years. I would like that to be wrong, but I don't see it. So, you know, it's still an issue. I just don't see it going away. And you know, it's going to be on people's minds, but in a different way. And I'm not saying it should be the top issue, and it maybe should have been combined with more things. And as I said yesterday, I think some of the issues we have to frame differently to have them resonate with how they actually impact people's lives.
Thanks. Just a quick question, picking up on something that Lynn mentioned. We haven't talked a lot about the role of the Trump kids or kids-in-law as well. We saw a lot of nepotism and actually profiting after leaving office in the case of the first Trump presidency. What do you think the role of the kids will be this time around, and people like, Jared Kushner, who allegedly there was, some tension there. What does that look like for the next 4 years?
I'm not sure what tension you mean. I mean, Jared and Ivanka, obviously I worked in the White House with them in the first term. They were a big part of the first term, have not been as out there this time around. Don Jr. and Eric certainly played a big role, and Laura Trump played a huge role in helping with this election. I mean, I think they will continue to, given the results. It would be hard to believe they didn't continue in some way. I don't think they're going to go into the White House, but I do think Don Jr. and Eric very much were proven right. I mean, they delivered great campaign for the president, and Laura Trump too, huge wins. And I think, very close with JD. And I do think that, they're going to be a big part of just the MAGA movement going forward. That's maybe a little different than policy. Ivanka and Jared were more involved in policy. I would see the family being more involved in protecting the brand, the overall MAGA movement brand. I think that's going to be a little more of their role going forward and less inside the White House.
Anything to add on that, Rob?
No. If you were going to say something, please finish. I was going to take organizer prerogative to ask the last question.
Please.
In addition to thanking you. So for Rob and Jarrod, I'll do a slight difference asking JoDee. If you visit the president-elect in the White House and you want him to succeed, which both of you do, what would be the one piece of advice you would give him right now for what would be the success, either to do or to avoid?
I would say to deliver on, promises made and promises kept, and that's, I think the things that are most important to Trump are the things you hear him talk about over and over again. He does want to end wars. And so we can debate over how he's going to get that done. But I do think that that is a noble goal. And I do think he believes that that is what he is in the White House to do. I think he believes he's in the White House to fix the economy and to end wars. And I would just say, do what you said you were going to do, deliver on those promises. And I think that's what he's going to do.
Yeah, I would just take it a little same strategy, just the tactics. I would say you have 100 days. Don't do we're going to, be the un-Republican for once. Like we're going to do healthcare and we're going to do infrastructure. We're going to do tax. I mean, Trump is in a way lucky because he's going to have 4 years of, unified government, which he probably only should have had 2 if he was reelected in 2020. So he's got kind of a strange, I wouldn't say he'd call it a gift, but some kind of opportunity that I don't think anyone predicted. And you have 100 days for this, that before DC starts to calcify, people are going to get in reelect modes and it's just, things are going to get harder.
So watch
it's like, was like a 4-seat House majority. I mean, and I would just, if it was me, I would call in all the chairmen and say, I want bills on my desk in 10 days and I want them on the floor in 20. I don't care. Like we're moving everything. And like bombing Berlin, we're going to lose some planes, but we're going to get most of them over the line. The only way to do it.
Good. So one is more of a temporal issue.
The
Let's get
tactical.
this done.
Yeah, tactical.
Let's
Like-
get,
like
we can't.
You,
And Jared's like, people are going to be going through your checklist. So make sure you can give them things that they can start checking off.
Yeah.
But okay, so JoDee, I would say you don't want President Trump to succeed, but let us say you might come in with a different attitude. What's the one thing you'd ask him to perhaps reconsider or think about more deeply than he has.
Well, I
Just
can
one.
honestly say I haven't thought quite like this in this lens. You know, I think what I would ask him is to say, you know, the things you could propose and do can actually harm people in ways that I don't necessarily think you believe. And so why don't you do the other things that you said you're going to do and leave us alone? I mean, you think I'm joking. I'm not joking. If he would leave us alone, that would be a much better outcome than what I fear is going to happen now. And so that's what I would ask.
Well, I think we're ready to wrap this up. It's been a long day. I know for Adam too, because he's been busy over at RAI. Thank you so much to the final panel and to the students. Great job. Great job.
I thought you were going to give me something.
You kept us on our toes, which is very good. Most students do that, so very good. It's just been so wonderful to have you here, and the generosity and welcoming of both RAI and the Rhodes Trust. So we thank all of that, and I think we have finally concluded, if not all the topics and all the answers and where we're going, at least we have concluded this conference at this point. And my prediction was true. We certainly even went closer to kumbaya than a cage fight. So I thank you for your civility and camaraderie as usual in discussing tough issues. All right.